The problem, Lucius reflected as he watched Chloe wrestle a monstrously large pine tree through their ridiculously undersized doorway, was not the holiday itself. He, Lucius the Unbent, king of the obsidian throne, lord of the shadowed valleys, had presided over festivals that made this Christmas look like a quiet Tuesday. He'd witnessed the blood moon feasts of his ancestors, the wild, chaotic revelry of the solstice hunts. He understood celebration. What he did not understand was the tinsel. "A little help here?" Chloe grunted, her voice muffled by a wall of fragrant needles. The tree, a behemoth of Yuletide aggression, was winning. It had already claimed a silk lampshade as a casualty of war. Lucius remained motionless by the grand, unlit fireplace of their penthouse apartment, a dark, still figure in a world that had suddenly exploded in red and green. "I fail to see the strategic value in bringing the wilderness indoors, my love. It is shedding. Copiously." "It's not strategic, it's festive," she strained, giving the trunk a final, desperate shove. The tree lurched into the room, sending a shower of pine needles across the polished floorboards. Chloe emerged from behind it, flushed and triumphant, a smudge of sap on her cheek. "There, see? Festive." Lucius arched a single, perfect eyebrow. The tree listed precariously to the left, like a drunken giant. "It appears to be mocking the very concept of verticality, and it has brought with it an army of insects." "It's a Christmas tree, Lucius. It's what people do." She dusted her hands on her jeans, her smile undimmed by his funereal pronouncements. Chloe's smile was a weapon against which he had no defense, a fact she exploited with breathtaking regularity. "And now for the fun part. We decorate." For the next 2 hours, Lucius was subjected to a series of baffling rituals. He was instructed to untangle strings of lights that seemed to possess a malevolent intelligence, their single purpose to knot themselves into impossible configurations. He was handed fragile glass baubles painted with disturbingly cheerful snowmen and told to hang them from the dying branches. He was forced to listen to music, a relentless assault of sleigh bells and chipper voices singing of meteorological impossibilities. It is a song about a mythical creature with a luminescent proboscis who is lauded for his mutation only when it becomes useful for navigating inclement weather, he stated, holding a glittery reindeer as if it were a venomous toad. It is a rather bleak commentary on the conditional nature of acceptance. Chloe laughed, a bright, musical sound that made the grim pronouncements of his soul quiet for a moment. "You're thinking about it too hard. Just hang him next to the sparkly pickle." There is a sparkly pickle. Of course there was. "It's for good luck." "The pickle," he said flatly, "is a preserved cucumber. I cannot fathom the circumstances under which it could be considered an agent of fortune." She just grinned and plugged in the lights. The room, his sanctuary of quiet shadows and muted tones, was instantly transformed into a seizure-inducing spectacle of blinking, multicolored chaos. Lucius felt a headache forming behind his ancient eyes. He endured. He endured the decorating, the saccharine music, the placement of the tree skirt, which seemed to serve no purpose other than to make the floor more flammable. He endured it all because it made Chloe happy, and her happiness had, to his eternal consternation, become the central organizing principle of his universe. It wasn't until she was nestled beside him on the velvet couch, the garish lights of the tree painting shifting patterns on her face, that the true crisis began. "This is going to be the best Christmas ever," she sighed, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I can't wait. Hot chocolate, presents in the morning, and of course, the main event." Lucius braced himself. "The pickle of fortune?" "No, silly. Santa." The name fell into the room with the weight of a thrown gauntlet. Santa. He'd heard the name whispered in the cacophony of the shopping districts he was sometimes forced to traverse. He had assumed it was a brand of carbonated beverage. "He is the master of ceremonies?" Lucius ventured, attempting to apply the logic of his own courtly functions to this madness. Chloe snuggled closer. Sort of. He's the one who brings the presents. He comes down the chimney at midnight on Christmas Eve. She paused, a playful glint in her eye. Don't worry, I'll leave him some cookies. Lucius went very, very still. Every predatory instinct, honed over a millennium of survival and dominance, screamed to life. An unknown entity, a male, one who possessed the power of nocturnal home invasion. An individual of such standing that he was offered tribute in the form of baked goods. He comes down the chimney, Lucius repeated slowly, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Yep, it's magic. And this is considered a welcome intrusion? It's not an intrusion, it's a tradition, she laughed. You know, he sees you when you're sleeping, he knows when you're awake. The blood in Lucius's veins, long dormant and cool, turned to ice. A being with global, constant scrying abilities. One who could monitor the sleep patterns of his mate. This was no mere tradition. This was a display of power. A threat. Chloe, he said, his voice a low thrum of carefully controlled urgency. Describe this Santa. Oh, you know, she said sleepily, her eyes starting to close. Big guy, white beard, red suit. Super jolly. Kind of the king of the North Pole. King. The word detonated in the silent chambers of Lucius's mind. A rival monarch. A northern warlord who practiced arcane arts of surveillance and infiltration. And he was coming here, to Lucius's home, to his mate's side. At midnight. Chloe was already drifting off to sleep, oblivious, murmuring something about gingerbread. But Lucius was awake. More awake than he had been in a century. He carefully extracted himself from her side, his movements silent and fluid. He retreated to his study, the one room in the apartment she had not yet contaminated with festive cheer. The vast mahogany desk was his altar of control, the laptop his reluctant oracle. He despised the internet. It was a chaotic, shrieking morass of idiocy and cat pictures. But it was also the world's most comprehensive, if deeply flawed, grimoire. His long, pale fingers, which had once signed treaties that shaped the fate of nations, typed a single, alien word into the search bar. Santa Claus. The results flooded the screen. He bypassed the commercial sites, the saccharine cartoons. His eyes, accustomed to deciphering ancient texts and the subtle tells of a liar, scanned for tactical data. A Wikipedia entry proved most illuminating. He dissected it with the cold precision of a field general studying a map of enemy territory. Also known as St. Nicholas, Father Christmas, multiple aliases, the sign of a practiced operative. His popular image is based on a poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas. Propaganda, then. A campaign to soften his image, to make him appear benign, a jolly old elf. Lucius knew the Fae. He knew their love of glamours, of cloaking terrible power in whimsical forms. An elf could mean anything from a mischievous sprite to a towering, armored warrior of the winter court. He is said to make a list of children throughout the world, categorizing them according to their behavior. A list of targets. A ledger of souls to be rewarded or punished. This was the work of a being who judged mortals on a global scale, a self-styled god. And to deliver presents, including toys and candy, to all of the well-behaved children in the world on the single night of Christmas Eve. Unfathomable logistics. To traverse the entire globe in one night suggested power over time and space itself. This was no mere territorial king. This was an entity on a scale he had not encountered since the Elder Wars. He clicked on another link, one that transcribed the lyrics to the song Chloe had mentioned. The words were a chilling confirmation of his fears. He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He knows if you've been bad or good. It was a litany of intimidation, a blatant declaration of omniscience. This wasn't a song for children. It was a warning, a vow of eternal, inescapable surveillance. And the method of entry, the chimney, a direct, unguarded portal into the heart of his home. It was audacious. It was insulting. It was a clear challenge to Lucius's sovereignty. No one entered his domain uninvited. No one. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. This Santa Claus, this King of the North Pole, was a fey warlord of immense power. The red suit was clearly the battle color of his clan. The jolliness was a glamour to lull his targets into a false sense of security. The presents were likely enchantments, Trojan horses designed to indebt or ensnare the recipient. And the tribute of milk and cookies? A demand for fealty, a test to see if the occupants of the home were properly submissive. And he was coming for Chloe. Why else would she be the one to bring him up? The Fae often worked through proxies, charming mortals into inviting them across the threshold. This warlord had somehow marked her, chosen her. Perhaps he sought to steal her away, to make her his queen in his frozen northern wasteland. A low growl rumbled in Lucius's chest, a sound that had not been heard outside a battlefield for 500 years. The thought of any other male, let alone a rival monarch, laying a hand on Chloe ignited a cold, possessive fury that burned through him like dragon's fire. He would not allow it. This apartment was his territory. Chloe was his mate. There would be no incursion. There would be no tribute. There would be war. He closed the laptop. The faint, cheerful sound of Chloe's soft breathing drifted in from the living room. She was so beautifully, terrifyingly vulnerable. She saw a world of sparkly pickles and friendly gift-givers. He saw a world of shadow and threat, a world he had sworn to protect her from. His gaze fell upon the listing pine monstrosity in the other room, its blinking lights now looking less like a celebration and more like a series of targeting lasers. The northern warlord wanted a welcome party. Lucius would be sure to give him one he would never forget. His Christmas preparations were about to begin. The first phase of Lucius's defense plan involved neutralizing the enemy's expected tribute. He found Chloe in the kitchen the next afternoon, humming along to a song about a man wishing for his 2 front teeth, a truly baffling aspiration. Flour dusted her nose, and she was surrounded by bowls, measuring cups, and a disturbing amount of sugar. "I'm making the cookies for Santa," she announced cheerfully, not looking up from the cookbook she was consulting. "Chocolate chip, the classic." "A wise choice," Lucius said, his voice a smooth, silken purr as he glided to her side. A gesture of welcome requires only the finest ingredients. He leaned over her shoulder, his gaze falling on the bowl of chocolate chips. They looked so innocent, so benign. Perfect for lulling an enemy into a state of complacency before delivering a debilitating toxin. "Allow me to assist," he offered. "My palate is exceptionally refined. I can ensure the flavor profile is perfectly balanced." Chloe beamed at him. "You want to help bake? Wow, look at you getting into the Christmas spirit. Okay, Mr. Moody, you can be in charge of the chips." It was almost too easy. While she was preoccupied with wrestling an electric mixer that seemed determined to redecorate the ceiling with batter, Lucius moved with silent, deadly efficiency. He palmed the bowl of chocolate chips. With a flick of his wrist, born of centuries of practice in sleight of hand, he swapped it with a small, heavy pouch he'd concealed in his jacket. The pouch contained his own specially prepared chips. He had spent the morning meticulously dicing the finest, most potent heads of garlic, consecrating each minuscule piece with a drop of holy water sourced from a particularly zealous online retailer, and then coating them in a thin, dark shell of unsweetened, 100% cacao to mimic the appearance of chocolate. The resulting concoction was, to a creature of the night, a poison of exquisite virulence. To a human, it would simply be the most offensively pungent cookie they had ever encountered. He hoped the Fey Warlord had a similar vulnerability. If not, the sheer shock of the taste should be disorienting enough to provide a tactical advantage. He poured the garlic nibs into the cookie dough. An immediate, powerful aroma filled the kitchen, a smell somewhere between a vampire's worst nightmare and a very aggressive pizzeria. Chloe stopped humming. She wrinkled her nose, sniffing the air. Whoa, what is that smell? Did you spill something? It is a spice from my homeland, Lucius said smoothly, stirring the pungent morsels into the dough with a wooden spoon. A festive spice. It is said to enhance the richness of the cacao bean. It is called allium sativum. She squinted at him. Sounds fancy. Smells like my Uncle Tony's breath after a pasta dinner. An acquired taste, Lucius assured her. It will lend the offering a certain authority. She shrugged, trusting him. It sent a sharp, unpleasant pang of guilt through him, but he crushed it. This was for her protection. She would thank him later, once the threat of the Northern King was neutralized and she was safe from his icy clutches. They baked the cookies. The apartment, already a sensory assault of pine and cinnamon, now had an overpowering top note of roasted garlic. Lucius watched with grim satisfaction as Chloe arranged the dark, malevolent-looking discs on a plate next to a glass of milk. They look a little weird, she admitted, poking one. And they really, really stink. Are you sure about this festive spice of yours? I am certain, Lucius said, his eyes fixed on the plate. He will not soon forget this tribute. The second phase of his plan required intelligence gathering. He needed to know more about the enemy's foot soldiers, these elves, who were said to populate his northern fortress. A quick search on his laptop revealed that a contingent of these creatures had established an outpost at a local temple of commerce known as the Westfield Galleria Mall. He dressed for the occasion in one of his finest black cashmere suits, a silent statement of power and authority. The mall was worse than he could have possibly imagined. It was a hellscape of shrieking children, frantic consumers, and an endless loop of the same 5 saccharine holiday songs. The air was thick with the scent of synthetic cinnamon and desperation. It was, Lucius decided, a far more effective torture than any dungeon he had ever designed. He located the enemy encampment in the center of the mall. It was a garish, sprawling construction of fake snow and painted cardboard, referred to by a sign as the Winter Wonderland. And at its center, upon a gaudy golden throne, sat a man in a red suit, a clear impostor, a proxy for the true king, designed to interface with the local populace. Surrounding him were the elves. They were not the tall, ethereal beings of myth. They were teenagers, clad in green and red felt, their faces a mixture of profound boredom and existential despair. Lucius's gaze scanned the group and settled on his target, a young male, slightly separated from the others, trying to surreptitiously check his phone behind a plastic gingerbread man. He looked weak. Lucius moved through the crowd like a phantom, his presence a sudden pocket of cold silence in the surrounding chaos. He cornered the elf behind a decorative sleigh. The boy, whose name tag read Kevin, looked up, startled. "Whoa, dude, can I help you? The line for Santa starts back there." Lucius leaned in, his voice a low whisper that cut through the noise of the mall. He didn't need to use his full powers of compulsion, not for a fledgling like this. A little intimidation would suffice. "I have no interest in your false monarch. I seek information. Speak to me of your master in the north." Kevin's eyes widened. "My master? You mean Mr. Henderson, the shift manager?" "Do not play games with me, emissary," Lucius hissed, his eyes glowing with a faint, crimson light. "Your true master, the one with the list." "Oh, Santa!" Kevin laughed nervously, a sound that was quickly strangled by the sheer intensity of Lucius's stare. "Right, Santa. Big guy. Knows his stuff." "His invasion plans," Lucius demanded. "When does the primary assault begin?" "The invasion?" Kevin stammered, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Dude, I think you've had one too many eggnog lattes. He just, delivers presents." "The presents," Lucius said, making quote marks with his fingers. "Are they cursed artifacts? Soul-binding contracts? What is their nature?" "They're toys? Like Legos and stuff. Barbies, you know." Kevin was sweating now, his felt hat wilting under the pressure. Lucius narrowed his eyes. Coded language. Legos must refer to modular infiltration units. Barbies were likely sleeper agents, glamored to look harmless. It was more sophisticated than he'd imagined. "And his workshop," Lucius pressed. "Is it a forge? Does he craft weapons of ice and shadow for his legions?" "He has a workshop, yeah, at the North Pole. Or, that's the story," Kevin whispered, desperate to placate the terrifying man in the black suit. "It's where they make the toys. It's a whole operation. Huge. A weapons factory, a massive one. This was worse than he thought. "Tell me this, elf," Lucius said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. "Your master, he comes at midnight. Does he come alone?" "Yeah, I guess. I mean, it's just him in the sleigh. And the reindeer, obviously." "Beasts of war," Lucius murmured to himself. "Airborne cavalry." "Look, man, I just gotta—" Kevin tried to edge away. Lucius placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, his grip deceptively light but immovably firm. "One final question. What is his greatest weakness?" Kevin stared at him, utterly baffled. "Weakness? I don't know, man. Carbs? My mom says he's looking a little chunky this year." Carbs. A metabolic vulnerability. Interesting, but likely a deception. Lucius released the terrified elf, who scurried away into the crowd without a backward glance. Lucius stood for a moment, a pillar of darkness amidst the festive chaos. The intelligence, though extracted from a clearly low-level operative, was invaluable. The enemy was a logistical genius with a massive weapons manufacturing capability and an airborne cavalry. He used coded language and employed sleeper agents disguised as children's toys. He walked away from the winter wonderland, his stride purposeful. He now knew what he was facing. It was time to fortify the castle. The final phase of Lucius's defense plan was executed with military precision while Chloe was out for a last-minute panic shopping trip. The moment her car left the underground garage, he set to work transforming their sleek, modern apartment into a death trap worthy of his ancestral home. The fireplace was the primary point of ingress. He started there. From a long-forgotten crate in his private storage unit, he retrieved 2 medieval crossbows, their dark wood polished to a sinister gleam. He mounted them on tripods he'd ordered online under the guise of camera equipment, positioning one on each side of the hearth. He then ran a network of high-tensile, nearly invisible silver wires across the chimney opening, connecting them to the trigger mechanisms. The slightest disturbance from above would unleash a volley of steel-tipped bolts into the chimney flue. It was a crude but effective welcoming committee. Next, the roof. He accessed it via a service ladder in the hallway. The December air was bitingly cold, but Lucius felt nothing. He moved across the gravel-topped surface of the penthouse roof with a predator's grace. He had purchased what the online vendor had described as the Mammoth Jubilee firework assortment. He interpreted firework as a euphemism for small, incendiary explosive devices. He carefully arranged the most powerful-looking tubes in a defensive perimeter around the chimney stack, creating a makeshift minefield. He was fairly certain they were not powerful enough to cause structural damage to the building, but they would certainly provide a significant and fiery surprise for any war beasts attempting a landing. Back inside, he addressed the finer details. He replaced the charming, cinnamon-scented candles Chloe had placed on the mantelpiece with thick, black tallow candles consecrated to repel spirits of the Fey courts. He painted a small, nearly invisible glyph of warding on the threshold in a solution of salt and iron filings. He even considered releasing his swarm of messenger bats to form a perimeter, but decided against it. The inevitable noise complaint from the downstairs neighbors would be more trouble than it was worth. When Chloe returned, laden with bags, he was standing in the living room, calmly reading a book of 14th century poetry. The crossbows were cleverly hidden behind two large potted ferns. The silver wires were invisible in the dim light. The apartment smelled faintly of garlic, pine, and brimstone. "I'm back," she called out, dropping her bags by the door. "And I am officially done. If anyone else needs a gift, they're getting a half-eaten granola bar from the bottom of my purse." She looked around, her brow furrowing slightly. "Did you move the plants?" "I felt the room's feng shui was unbalanced," Lucius replied, without looking up from his book. "This arrangement promotes a more defensive energy flow." "Okay, Mr. Feng Shui," she said, walking over to kiss the top of his head. "Whatever you say. All I know is that it's Christmas Eve. My work is done. Time to relax." The hours leading up to midnight were a unique form of torture for Lucius. Chloe, utterly oblivious to the impending siege, insisted on a romantic evening. She put on soft music, lit the non-consecrated candles on the dining table, and served a meal she had spent all day preparing. Lucius ate, but tasted nothing. His senses were stretched to their absolute limit. He could hear the scuttling of a mouse in the walls 3 floors down. He could feel the subtle vibrations of the elevator moving through the building's core. Every creak of the old building, every gust of wind against the windows, was the sound of an approaching enemy. He kept glancing at the fireplace, his eyes tracing the hidden network of silver wires. "You seem a little tense," Chloe observed, taking a sip of her wine. "Is everything okay? You've been acting weird for days. First, the garlic apocalypse in the kitchen, and now you're staring at the fireplace like you're expecting it to attack you." "I am merely contemplating the archaic inefficiency of chimney-based heating," he lied, his mind racing through battle scenarios. "If the crossbows fail, I engage in close-quarters combat. The broadsword is ready behind the bookshelf. He is large, according to the elf, but likely unused to true resistance." "Right. Archaic inefficiency," she said, her tone laced with skepticism. "Look, I know you're not a big Christmas guy. I get it. It's all a bit much. But it means a lot to me that you're trying. Even if you did make the apartment smell like a vampire slayer's convention." He felt that pang of guilt again, sharper this time. She was trying to connect with him, to share something that brought her joy, and he was deceiving her, preparing for a war she didn't even know was coming. But what was the alternative? To tell her the truth? To explain that her beloved holiday figure was a sinister Fey warlord coming to steal her away? She would think he was insane. No, it was better this way. He would be her silent, unthanked protector. He would face this threat alone. "Your traditions are compelling," he offered, which was not entirely a lie. The sheer audacity of this Santa was indeed compelling. After dinner, they moved to the couch. Chloe put on a black-and-white movie about a man who learns the value of his life with the help of a bumbling angel. Lucius did not follow the plot. He was tracking the movement of the moon, calculating the minutes until midnight. The witching hour. The perfect time for an assault. As the clock on the mantel ticked past 11:30, he knew he could no longer maintain his civilian disguise. "I will return momentarily," he said, standing up with a sudden, stiff formality. "Where are you going?" Chloe asked, looking up from the movie. "To change into something more comfortable." He retreated to their bedroom, but he did not reach for his silk pajamas. Instead, he opened the false back of his antique armoire. There, gleaming in the dim light, was his armor. It was ancestral plate, forged in volcanic fires and quenched in the blood of elder drakes. Each piece was etched with runes of power and protection. It had been centuries since he had worn it for anything other than a ceremonial occasion. Tonight, it would taste battle once more. The process of arming himself was a ritual. The greaves, the sabatons, the cuirass cinched tight over his chest. The pauldrons, the vambraces, each buckle fastened, each leather strap pulled taut. The armor settled onto his frame with a familiar, comforting weight. He was no longer Lucius, the slightly odd, anachronistic boyfriend. He was Lucius the Unbent, king of the obsidian throne, a warrior. He retrieved his broadsword, Shadow Drinker, from its scabbard. The hilt felt cool and perfect in his grip. The blade, forged of a fallen star, hummed with a faint, hungry energy. When he returned to the living room, Chloe was staring at him, her mouth agape. The movie was forgotten. The only sound was the crackling of the fire. He stood before her in full, battle-ready plate armor, the polished dark metal reflecting the insane blinking of the Christmas tree lights. His broadsword was held at a low guard. "Lucius," she said, her voice a strangled whisper, "what, in the name of all that is holy, are you wearing?" "My ceremonial garb," he said, his voice slightly muffled by the gorget protecting his throat. "Ceremonial garb? You look like you're about to go sack a medieval village. Is this a LARPing thing? Did I not get the memo for a Christmas-themed live-action roleplay?" "This is no game, Chloe," he said grimly, taking up a strategic position beside the fireplace. His gaze was fixed on the chimney flue. "The hour approaches." The grandfather clock in the hall began to chime, midnight. Each bong was a hammer blow against the silence. Chloe was still staring, a look of profound, unadulterated bafflement on her face. Lucius ignored her. His every sense was focused on the chimney, on the impending incursion. 1, 2, 3. He could feel a shift in the air, a subtle pressure change. 4, 5, 6. A faint scratching sound from above, the war beasts landing on the roof. He tensed, his grip tightening on his sword. He hoped the fireworks would disorient them. 7, 8, 9. A muffled curse, followed by a shower of soot that puffed out of the fireplace, dusting the pristine white hearth. 10, 11. There was a loud scraping sound from within the chimney, a frantic scrabbling, as if something was losing its purchase. Lucius braced himself, planting his armored feet firmly on the floor. The silver tripwires were taut. The crossbows were armed and ready. On the 12th chime of midnight, it happened. A figure, covered head to toe in black soot, tumbled out of the fireplace with a strangled yelp, landing in a heap on the hearthrug. The figure was clad in red, just as the intelligence had suggested, though the material looked distressingly cheap and flammable. It was holding a small, wiggling crate. Lucius did not hesitate. With a battle cry that echoed with the fury of 1,000 lonely years, he lunged. The 200 pounds of vampire and steel plate armor crashed into the intruder with the force of a battering ram. "Yield, Northern King!" Lucius roared, pinning the flailing, soot-covered man to the floor. "Yield this domain to its rightful sovereign!" The chaos that erupted in the next 30 seconds was biblical. The intruder, who was far scrawnier and less regal than Lucius had anticipated, let out a terrified shriek that was several octaves higher than any warlord should be capable of. The crate he was holding flew from his hands, hit the edge of the coffee table, and burst open. From the splintered wood emerged not a cursed artifact or a sleeper agent, but a small, terrified, and utterly adorable golden retriever puppy. Chloe screamed. The puppy, recovering from its shock with the resilience of its species, began to bark, a series of high-pitched, excited yaps. "Surrender your claim to my mate, you fiendish fae!" Lucius bellowed, pressing the edge of his broadsword against the intruder's throat. "I'm not a fae! I'm Gary! I'm an actor! Please don't hurt me! I have headshots!" the man shrieked, his voice cracking with pure terror. A cheap white beard, askew and flecked with soot, was clinging precariously to one ear. The puppy, deciding this was all a fantastic new game, bounded over and began enthusiastically licking Lucius's armored faceplate. "Lucius, get off of him!" Chloe's voice finally cut through the din. She ran over and began tugging uselessly at his massive steel pauldron. "What are you doing? That's Santa!" "I am aware," Lucius snarled, trying to shove the relentlessly affectionate puppy away from him, his helmet. "I am neutralizing the threat." "My agent said this was a simple delivery gig," Gary sobbed from beneath him. "A singing Santagram plus puppy. He said you were quirky clients. He didn't say anything about a homicidal knight." The puppy, having failed to lick its way through Lucius's helm, changed tactics and began chewing vigorously on the leather strap of his sabaton. It was this final, absurd detail that finally broke the spell of Lucius's battle rage. The sight of the tiny, fluffy creature gnawing on his war boot, combined with the terrified squeaking of the man beneath him, and Chloe's frantic pulling, created a tableau of such profound ridiculousness that his millennial-old mind struggled to process it. "Get off him. Now," Chloe ordered, her voice leaving no room for argument. Slowly, stiffly, Lucius rose. He felt foolish, an emotion he was not accustomed to. He looked down at the whimpering man on the floor. He was not a Fey warlord. He was just a man in a cheap suit, covered in soot, who looked like he was about to have a nervous breakdown. "Who are you?" Lucius asked, his voice losing its thunderous authority. "I'm Gary, from Starlight Performers," he squeaked, scrambling backward until he hit the leg of the couch. "Chloe hired me. For the puppy. It's a surprise. Please, the sword is very pointy." Lucius looked from the terrified actor to the puppy, who had now abandoned his boot in favor of chasing its own tail, and then to Chloe. Her face was a storm of conflicting emotions, anger, confusion, and a dawning, horrified understanding. She pointed a trembling finger at Lucius, still standing there in full armor, sword in hand, while a puppy did zoomies around the wreckage of their living room. "You," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "You and me. Study. Now." She turned to the trembling actor. "Gary, I am so sorry. There's cash on the kitchen counter. A lot of it. Take it all. And the garlic cookies. Just, please go." Gary didn't need to be told twice. He snatched the plate of malevolent cookies, grabbed a wad of cash from the counter, and fled the apartment as if the hounds of hell were at his heels, leaving a trail of soot behind him. The heavy oak door of the study clicked shut, sealing them in. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any battle cry. The apartment beyond the door was a mess, soot on the rug, a broken crate, and the distant, happy yapping of a puppy discovering a squeaky toy. But in here, the air was thick with unanswered questions. Chloe stood with her arms crossed, her foot tapping a furious staccato rhythm on the hardwood floor. She had bypassed anger and gone straight to a state of calm, incandescent rage that Lucius knew from experience was far more dangerous. "Explain," she said. It wasn't a request. Lucius stood in the center of the room, feeling utterly absurd. The ancestral armor, which had felt so powerful and right just minutes before, now felt like a ridiculous, oversized costume. The mighty broadsword in his hand was suddenly heavy and clumsy. He looked like a child's toy, a caricature of a knight. "I was neutralizing a threat," he said, the word sounding weak even to his own ears. "A threat? Lucius, that was Gary. He's a struggling actor from Sherman Oaks. His greatest threat is his receding hairline. You tackled a minimum-wage Santa Claus." "I had reason to believe he was a powerful entity," he insisted, gesturing vaguely with the sword. "A rival monarch, the king of the North Pole." Chloe stared at him as if he had just started speaking in tongues. "The king of the North Pole? You mean Santa?" "Precisely. A Fey warlord with global surveillance capabilities and a mastery of home infiltration." She just kept staring. The silence stretched. Then she held up a hand. Wait. Go back. Where in God's name did you get the idea that Santa Claus was a Fey warlord?" This was it, the moment of truth. He had no choice but to reveal the pathetic, humiliating depths of his misunderstanding. With a deep sigh that rattled the plates of his cuirass, he walked over to his desk and opened the laptop. He brought up the search history, the Wikipedia page, the song lyrics. "The evidence was overwhelming," he began, his voice taking on the tone of a scholar presenting a thesis. "He has multiple aliases. He maintains a list of targets, a global ledger. His followers speak of him in code, Legos for infiltration units, Barbies for sleeper agents." Chloe's eyes scanned the screen. Her expression slowly shifted from anger to utter disbelief. "Infiltration units? Lucius, Legos are building blocks." "Modular," he corrected her. "And his method of travel, a sleigh pulled by airborne beasts, suggests an accomplished cavalry. He operates from a northern fortress, a workshop, which my intelligence operative confirmed was a massive weapons factory." "Your intelligence operative?" she whispered, her voice faint. "The elf boy, at the mall. Kevin. He was a reluctant source, but he confirmed the scope of the operation." Chloe slowly sank into the leather chair opposite the desk. She put her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking. For a moment, Lucius thought she was crying. Then he realized she was laughing. It started as a low tremor and grew into a full-blown, helpless, wheezing gale of laughter. She laughed so hard she couldn't breathe, tears streaming down her face. She pointed at him, a knight in shining armor brought low by a Christmas myth, and laughed until she was gasping. "You interrogated a mall elf?" she finally managed to choke out between peals of laughter. "Oh my God! You thought Kevin, who is 17 and saving up for a used Honda Civic, was an enemy spy?" The laughter, somehow, was worse than the anger. It stripped away the last vestiges of his dignity. He stood there, a 1,000-year-old king, being mocked for his foolishness. "And the cookies!" she gasped, clutching her stomach. "The garlic cookies! You were trying to poison Santa Claus!" Her laughter finally subsided, leaving her wiping tears from her eyes. The anger was gone, replaced by something soft and warm and achingly tender. She looked at him, truly looked at him, standing there in his ridiculous armor, and her smile was filled with a fondness that made his cold heart ache. "Oh, you absolute magnificent idiot," she said softly. The humor drained from the room, replaced by the quiet hum of the unasked question. Why? Why had he gone to such absurd, extreme lengths? Lucius finally set his broadsword down, the clang of the pommel on the mahogany desk echoing in the silence. He reached up and unclasped his helmet, pulling it off and setting it beside the sword. He ran a hand through his dark hair, his face pale and weary in the lamplight. The jokes were over. "He sees you when you're sleeping," Lucius said, his voice low and devoid of its usual formal cadence. "He knows when you're awake. He knows where you live." He looked at her, his ancient eyes filled with a raw, unguarded vulnerability she had rarely seen. "You told me a king was coming into our home. At midnight, a being of immense power, who watches you, who knows you intimately. A being you were preparing to welcome, to leave an offering for." He took a hesitant step toward her, the armor creaking with the movement. "Chloe, for 1,000 years my home has been a fortress. My throne, a seat of absolute power. No one enters my domain without my leave. No one dares. It is the one law upon which my entire existence has been built." He stopped in front of her chair, looking down at her. The thought of another king, another power, breaching these walls, coming into this space, where you sleep, where you are safe? I could not bear it. His voice dropped to a whisper, filled with a desperate, ancient loneliness. "I have lost kingdoms. I have lost armies. I have lost everything I ever built. I will not lose you. I could not stomach the thought of some other monarch, fey or otherwise, thinking he had any claim, any right to even stand in the same room as you." There it was, the truth. Not a strategic defense of territory, but a primal, jealous, terrified fear of losing her. It was pathetic. It was irrational. It was the most honest he had been in centuries. He had prepared for war not because he was a king defending his castle, but because he was a man defending his entire world. Chloe looked up at him, her eyes shining. The last of her amusement had melted away, replaced by a profound, overwhelming wave of love. She reached out and placed her hand on his armored gauntlet. The contrast of her warm, soft skin against the cold, hard steel was everything. "So you declared war on Christmas," she said, her voice thick with emotion. He gave a short, self-deprecating nod. "My methods were flawed. My intelligence, questionable. My understanding of festive baked goods, catastrophic." She stood up, still holding his hand. She had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "It was the most ridiculous, over-the-top, insane, and absurdly romantic thing anyone has ever done for me." She rose on her toes and kissed him. It wasn't a passionate kiss, but one of deep, quiet understanding. It was a kiss that said, "I see the lonely old king under all this armor, and I love him." "Come on, my fearsome warlord," she murmured against his lips. "Let's go meet your new puppy. And then you are going to help me get you out of this ridiculous tin can." Later, the apartment was quiet. The soot had been hastily vacuumed. Gary was a distant, traumatic memory. The puppy, whom Chloe had immediately named Gary Jr. in a fit of giggles, a decision Lucius was already planning to contest, was asleep on a soft blanket by the fire, his small body twitching with puppy dreams. Lucius, finally free of his armor and dressed in soft cashmere, sat on the couch with Chloe nestled against his side. The Christmas tree, which he now saw not as a tactical liability, but as the strangely beautiful thing she saw, blinked its colorful lights, casting a warm glow over the room. His hand rested on the puppy's soft fur, and the creature let out a contented sigh in its sleep. "So," Chloe said, her voice sleepy, "I think we've learned a valuable lesson tonight." "Indeed," Lucius agreed. "Never trust a source named Kevin who smells of cheap cologne and desperation." She giggled, poking him in the ribs. "No, we learned that my boyfriend is a secret, terrifying, medieval super nerd who will literally go to war with a beloved holiday icon to protect me." An oversimplification, but not entirely inaccurate, he conceded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "I love you, you know," she said softly, looking up at him. "Even when you're plotting to poison mythical beings with garlic." "And I, you," he said, his voice a low rumble of pure contentment. He looked from her face to the sleeping puppy to the ridiculous, glittering tree. He had fought a war against a phantom, all based on a preposterous misunderstanding. He had made a fool of himself, and in doing so, he had discovered a truth deeper than any ancient lore. This was home. Not a fortress to be defended, but a warm, chaotic, and utterly perfect place filled with light and laughter, and a woman who understood the frightened heart of the monster she loved. "Okay," Chloe murmured, her eyes closing. "But just so we're clear for next year, we are absolutely doing Easter. The bunny is mostly harmless." Lucius felt a familiar, cold dread begin to prickle at the edges of his newfound peace. A bunny. Another creature of the Fae, no doubt, known for their speed, their cunning, their terrifyingly prolific nature. He would have to research this Easter. He would need to be prepared. But as he looked down at Chloe, asleep on his shoulder, he knew that this time, he might just ask for her help with the battle plan.